Who doesn't dream of escaping to an isolated cabin surrounded by snow-covered mountains? But what if that dream getaway comes with rules you can't quite understand? My name is Anna, and for the longest time, my biggest dream was to escape the suffocating routine of city life. I always imagined a peaceful place where I could forget the chaos, the endless deadlines, and the blaring horns that echoed through the streets. So, when I came across the listing for that cabin in Switzerland, it felt like the universe was finally listening. It was everything I had ever wanted. A charming cabin nestled in snow-covered mountains, complete with a cozy fireplace and breathtaking views. The description on Airbnb was almost poetic, promising a stay of pure relaxation and connection with nature. Escape to the paradise of the Alps. Absolute silence, total privacy, and a magical atmosphere. The photos were mesmerizing. The cabin looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, with rustic wooden walls, large windows offering panoramic views, and a deck perfect for enjoying sunsets with a cup of hot chocolate. Without hesitation, I made the booking. The idea of spending a week away from it all, accompanied only by the sound of the wind in the trees, was irresistible. The host, a man named Klaus, responded promptly with a polite message confirming my stay and providing detailed instructions. But as I read through those instructions, something felt off. Alongside the usual guidance on how to light the fireplace and turn off the central heating, there was a list of rules. Very specific rules. Please follow these rules to ensure a safe and pleasant stay. Do not let the fireplace go out after sunset. Do not open the door to anyone after 10 p.m., even if they claim to be local. Make sure to close all curtains at dusk. Under no circumstances, leave the cabin after midnight. I reread the rules multiple times, trying to make sense of them. They weren't just peculiar, they were almost disturbing. Why would anyone need such guidelines in a remote, tranquil place? But my eagerness to escape my routine outweighed my curiosity about the rules. It must be a way to protect guests from the cold, I thought, trying to reassure myself. Without further hesitation, I packed my bags and boarded the flight to Switzerland. The journey to the cabin was long, but it was worth it. As the rental car wound its way up the mountain roads, the scenery grew more enchanting. Snow-covered trees, frozen streams, and a sky painted golden by the afternoon sun made it feel like I was entering another world. When I finally arrived, the cabin was even more beautiful than in the photos. But as I admired its charm, I couldn't shake the thought of the rules. Klaus had been insistent in his messages. I needed to follow them to the letter. There was something unsettling about his tone, as if there was more he wasn't telling me. Still, I chose to ignore it. After all, I was here to relax. What could possibly go wrong? Underscore 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 underscore. Inside, the cabin was as welcoming as I'd imagined. The air carried the scent of aged wood and something faintly sweet, as if the place had absorbed decades of stories within its pine walls. I set my bags by the door and began to explore. The space was small but perfectly cozy. A living room with a stone fireplace, a compact kitchen, and a bedroom upstairs. On the living room table, I found an envelope with my name written in neat handwriting. Curious, I opened it and pulled out another printed list of rules. My first reaction was suspicion. Why would they need to remind me of rules I'd already been sent? But as I read, I realized these instructions were different and much more specific. Please follow these guidelines for your safety. Do not look out the window after midnight. Do not leave the cabin during the night. If you hear footsteps upstairs, ignore them. The fireplace must remain lit until dawn. My eyes lingered on the third rule. Footsteps upstairs? I thought. I'm the only one here. There shouldn't be anyone else. I held the list for a few moments longer, trying to make sense of it. The rules were so specific they felt more like warnings than simple guidelines for guests. But my practical mind quickly dismissed the unease. Local superstitions, I decided. Perhaps it was some cultural tradition the mountain folk followed out of habit. I set the list aside and began settling in. The cabin was starting to cool as the evening set in, so I lit the fireplace. The crackling flames filled the space with warmth and a sense of safety, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, the words from the rules echoed in my mind. If you hear footsteps upstairs, ignore them. It was a rule impossible to forget. After all, I knew there shouldn't be any footsteps in a place where I was alone. Instead of dwelling on it, I decided to enjoy the moment. I made myself a cup of tea, curled up on the sofa near the fireplace, and focused on the purpose of my trip: relaxation. After all, I had come here to escape stress, not create problems in my mind. However, as the night deepened and the shadows on the walls began to grow, the list of rules seemed increasingly present, as if the entire cabin was waiting to test me. The first night in the cabin started as peacefully as I had hoped. The fireplace was lit, spreading its warmth across the room as I nestled on the couch with a blanket and a mug of hot chocolate. The sound of the wind outside was almost comforting, a reminder that I was far from the chaos and rush of the city. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. As the clock approached midnight, a strange feeling began to creep in. It wasn't fear exactly, but a persistent curiosity I couldn't ignore. What could be out there? The cabin's view was breathtaking during the day, with mountains and forests stretching as far as the eye could see. What would it look like at night? The rules came back to mind. Do not look out the window after midnight. For a few minutes, I wrestled with the curiosity. It's just a superstition, I thought. There's nothing out there but snow and trees. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it nagged at me. Finally, I gave in. I got up from the couch and walked to the living room window. The glass was cold to the touch, and my breath formed a faint mist as I leaned closer. Outside, darkness engulfed everything, with only the pale glow of the moon reflecting off the snow. At first, everything seemed calm, just as I imagined. But then, something moved. A shadow, faint and almost imperceptible, slid between the trees. My eyes narrowed trying to focus, but it moved too quickly for me to identify. For a moment, I thought it was just the wind stirring the branches, but the shadow appeared again, this time closer. My heart started to race. Something or someone was standing in the snow, at a considerable distance from the cabin. Its silhouette was strange, too tall and slightly crooked. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. I stepped back from the window, my entire body tense. I just imagined it, I told myself, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. My gaze returned to the list of rules on the table. The third instruction now felt more like a warning than a simple rule. With trembling hands, I reinforced the curtains and sat back on the couch. The fireplace still crackled, but the warmth seemed to have left the room. For the first time, I began to wonder, what exactly did Klaus know about this cabin that he hadn't told me? The early hours of the morning fell like a heavy veil over the cabin. The sound of the wind seemed louder, as if it were trying to force its way through the windows. Despite the fire's heat, an unsettling feeling kept me alert. Sleep was impossible. Shadows danced on the walls, moved by the flickering flames, and every crackle of the wood in the fire seemed louder than it should. I glanced at the clock. It was past 3 a.m. That's when I noticed the fire in the fireplace was dying. The flames were nearly extinguished, and the embers, which had once burned brightly, were now faint points of light in the darkness. The rule echoed in my mind. The fireplace must remain lit until dawn. In a rush, I got up and went to the pile of firewood beside the fireplace. Grabbing one of the larger logs, I knelt to place it over the embers. I blew gently to reignite the flames, feeling the warmth gradually return. As the fire came back to life, the room seemed to regain some of its safety. But then I heard it. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, coming from above. A creak, like wood being pressed under the weight of something or someone. I froze, my eyes fixed on the flames, while my mind tried to process what I had just heard. Another creak, louder this time, followed by an almost rhythmic sound, like footsteps. My breath caught in my chest, and the list of rules flashed in my memory. If you hear footsteps upstairs, ignore them. Ignore them. Every instinct in my body screamed to look at the ceiling, to confirm that I was imagining things. But the rule felt like a shout in my mind, a desperate warning. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm myself, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But the footsteps continued. Slow, deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was upstairs knew I could hear it. Each step was a weight on my consciousness, a provocation testing me every second. It's not real, I whispered to myself. It's just the wood, it's the wind, there's no one here. I forced myself to stay still, to focus on the fire that now crackled strongly in the fireplace. The heat was comforting, but not enough to shake the feeling of being watched. Finally, the footsteps stopped, leaving a silence as heavy as the darkness outside. I stayed there for a few more minutes, waiting to hear anything else, but nothing happened. Finally, I returned to the couch, my eyes fixed on the fireplace, as if it were my only connection to safety. That night, I didn't sleep. With every little sound, my body tensed, and the question I refused to answer echoed in my mind. What if it wasn't just my imagination? The second night was different from the start. There was something in the air, an almost tangible feeling that something was wrong. Even before sunset, I felt uneasy. I closed all the curtains as usual, but this time, I went further. I checked every window and locked all the doors, ensuring nothing, and no one could get in. By 11 p.m., the cabin was silent. The fireplace was lit, as always, but the glow of the flames felt less comforting. It was as if the entire room had grown colder, despite the fire's warmth. I did my best to distract myself, reading a book I had brought, but my mind kept drifting back to the list of rules. Especially the first one, do not look out the window after midnight. At midnight, I heard a sound from outside. It wasn't the wind, which blew constantly, but something softer, a tap against the glass. My body tensed. The sound repeated, and this time it was unmistakable. Something or someone was tapping on the window. Curiosity tugged at me to look, but the rule echoed in my mind like a blaring warning. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore it, but the sound persisted, insistent. After a few minutes, the noise stopped, and silence fell once again. I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I got up to reinforce the curtains, something made me freeze. There were marks on the window. Large, irregular handprints covered the glass. Each finger seemed elongated, almost inhuman, and the prints faced inward, as if something had tried to peer into the cabin. My breath caught in my chest, and my heart raced. With trembling hands, I reinforced the curtains and quickly stepped away. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every small sound, every creak of the wood, sent my body into high alert. The feeling of being watched was almost unbearable, but I forced myself to stay put, following the rules to the letter. When morning finally arrived, I mustered the courage to open the front door. The sun illuminated the outdoors, dispelling some of the fear from the previous night, but what I saw disturbed me even more. There were footprints around the cabin. They were large, uneven, and circled the structure as if something had been prowling all night. But the most terrifying detail was the direction of the tracks. There were no trails leading back to the forest. It was as though the thing had appeared out of nowhere. I hurried back inside and locked the door again, my heart pounding. The list of rules now felt far more than just superstition. Something was out there, something that didn't belong in this world. And I knew that if I wanted to survive, I'd have to follow every rule with absolute precision. That morning, As sunlight streamed into the cabin, my mind was still fixated on the handprints on the window and the footprints around the house. Something was wrong and I needed answers. I grabbed my phone and opened the app where I had booked the cabin. I sent a message to the host, Klaus, hoping he could clarify. "Hi, Klaus. I noticed the rules you gave me are very specific. Does this have anything to do with what happened here before?" The reply came faster than I expected, but it didn't bring the reassurance I needed. "Follow the instructions," he wrote. "They are for your protection." I read the message over and over, hoping for more, but there were no additional explanations, no attempts to comfort me. Just a simple, direct warning. It only heightened my anxiety. If Klaus wouldn't tell me more, I decided I would find out for myself. After double-checking all the locks and curtains, I sat down with my laptop and began researching the area. The internet was slow but functional enough for me to gather some basic information. The more I read, the more my unease grew. Apparently, the cabin had a history. Decades ago, during harsh winters, residents from nearby villages reported strange incidents. Unexplained disappearances, tracks in the snow that led nowhere, whispers in the night that seemed to come from all directions. One old article caught my attention. It mentioned something about night visitors, described by witnesses as tall, slender figures with movements that resembled humans but were different. These visitors always appeared during winter, and reports claimed they would circle isolated homes and cabins. Some people believed they were mountain spirits, while others insisted they were something more tangible, but just as dangerous. The article mentioned that in every case, families who followed specific rules, like keeping a fire lit or avoiding looking out the window at night, reported escaping unscathed. Those who ignored the warnings, however, disappeared without a trace. I closed the laptop and glanced around the cabin. The place that had been my refuge now felt more like a trap. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every sound a warning. The list of rules on the table was no longer a curiosity. It was now my only hope of survival. As night approached, my mind was filled with questions I knew would likely never be answered. But one thing was certain. I couldn't break any of the rules. The third night arrived with a different weight. The silence felt thicker, almost tangible, and every shadow seemed larger than the day before. Despite following the rules rigorously so far, part of me began to question everything. What if none of this is real? What if it's just superstition and paranoia? These thoughts stayed with me until midnight. I sat by the fireplace, trying to distract myself with a book, but my mind was restless. The list of rules sat on the table as if it were watching me, challenging me. The first rule, do not look out the window after midnight, felt like an impossible invitation to resist. The urge grew stronger, and no matter how much I tried to fight it, curiosity won out. Slowly, I got up, my heart pounding faster with each step. When I reached the window, the curtains were drawn, but moonlight filtered through small gaps. I gripped the curtain with trembling fingers, hesitating for a moment before pulling it aside. What I saw left me frozen. Outside, surrounding the cabin, were several tall, hooded figures. Their outlines were irregular, as if their bodies didn't follow human logic. They stood in a perfect circle, their heads turned directly toward the window where I stood. There were no visible eyes, but I knew they were looking at me. I felt it, a suffocating weight that made my heart feel like it might stop. My instinct screamed at me to close the curtains and run, but my body wouldn't respond. My hands trembled, and my eyes couldn't look away. Their presence was hypnotic, almost as if they were pulling me outside with their gaze. And then I blinked. When my eyes reopened, the circle was empty. There were no footprints in the snow, no trace of where they might have gone. It was as if they had never been there, yet the air around the cabin felt heavier, colder. I let go of the curtains and stumbled backward, struggling to catch my breath. My entire body was trembling, and the list of rules now felt more like a sentence than a protection. I had broken the first rule, and deep down I knew this wouldn't go unnoticed. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor near the fireplace, unable to sleep. Every sound, every creak of the wood made my heart race. I didn't know what would happen next, but I was certain of one thing. I had done exactly what I wasn't supposed to. And now something new. I was here. The night, already terrifying, became unbearable when the sound started. First, a faint tapping on the walls of the cabin, like something testing its defenses. Then came the knocks, loud, rhythmic, as if multiple hands were trying to force their way inside. I ran to the fireplace, my heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo throughout the cabin. The flame still burned, but the pile of firewood beside it was nearly gone. I grabbed the last logs, placed them on the fire, and blew to reignite the dying embers. The knocking on the walls continued, now accompanied by a low sound, almost like a whisper. It wasn't words, but something indecipherable, something that made my skin crawl. My mind screamed for me to run, but where would I go? Out there, those figures were waiting, and I knew there was no escaping them. Then the footsteps started. They came from upstairs, but they weren't light like the previous night. This time, they were fast, heavy, like something was running back and forth across the ceiling. Each step made the wood creak, and the feeling that the roof might cave in at any moment was overwhelming. The list of rules flashed in my mind. If you hear footsteps upstairs, ignore them. Ignore them. But how could I ignore it when it felt like the entire roof was alive? I held my head in my hands, trying to block out the sound, but it continued, growing louder, more insistent. The knocking on the walls intensified, almost as if the figures outside were synchronized with whatever was above me. I glanced back at the fireplace. The flames were dying down, and my mind raced for alternatives. There wasn't enough wood left to keep the fire going until dawn. What would happen if the fireplace went out? The rules didn't say, but deep down I knew it was something I didn't want to find out. I tried to stay in control, but the sound of the footsteps and the pounding seemed to invade my mind, coming closer and closer, more threatening with every second. I was cornered, with no way out, and fear was the only thing filling the room. At that moment, I realized the cabin was no longer just a refuge. It was a battleground, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold out. Panic finally overtook me. The pounding, the footsteps above, the oppressive sounds from the cabin around me. I couldn't take it anymore. My mind repeated incessantly that I needed to get out. No matter what the rules said, I had to escape. I grabbed my coat in a hurry and unlocked the door, ignoring the icy burn on my hands as I pushed the wood against the wind. The darkness outside was almost complete, broken only by the faint glow of the moon reflecting off the snow. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. Immediately, something felt wrong. The forest surrounding the cabin, which I had admired during the day, seemed different. The trees were distorted. Their trunks leaned at impossible angles, and the branches formed grotesque silhouettes against the night sky. The snow on the ground seemed to ripple slightly, as if it were alive. Before I could react, I heard the sound. Footsteps. Many footsteps, crunching the snow with unnerving precision. I turned back and saw them again. Tall, hooded figures, moving with a frightening coordination. They were coming toward me, and this time they weren't standing still, observing. They were hunting me. My heart raced and I ran. The snow made every step a monumental effort, but adrenaline kept me moving. I could hear the figures' steps drawing closer, echoing in the night like war drums. Their whispers, now louder, sounded like distorted laughter, mocking my desperation. I ran without looking back, trying to distance myself from the cabin and the things chasing me. The forest seemed endless, each tree identical to the last, as if I were running in circles. My body was nearing its limit, and the icy air cut my throat like knives. Then the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I had reached a snow-covered slope and tumbled down, my body rolling uncontrollably as gravity pulled me down. I couldn't scream. The shock and cold had stolen my voice. My body collided with something hard, and the last thing I saw before everything went black was the night sky, marred by the shapes of distorted trees. Silence returned, but this time it was complete. My mind plunged into darkness, and the world around me disappeared. The warm sunlight on my face brought me back to consciousness. My head throbbed, and every muscle in my body felt like it weighed a ton. When I opened my eyes, I saw the endless white around me. I was lying in the snow, my breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. It took a few seconds for the memories to return. The desperate chase, the hooded figures, the fall down the slope, everything was a blur. I looked around and, to my astonishment, saw the cabin in the distance. Intact, silent, almost inviting, as if the horrors of the previous night had never happened. With difficulty, I got to my feet, shivering from the cold and exhaustion. Every step back to the cabin felt endless, but something drew me there, a need to understand what had happened. When I finally reached the door, it was unlocked. I stepped inside and shut it behind me, trying to absorb the remaining warmth from the fireplace. The interior was exactly as I had left it. There was no sign of the figures or the night's events. Then I noticed my phone vibrating on the table. A new message from Klaus, the host. With trembling hands, I opened the app and read, "You survived. Many don't. Please rate your stay on Airbnb." I stared at the screen, unable to process what I had just read. Surreal didn't even begin to describe what I was feeling. The host knew what happened here. He knew about the rules, about the night visitors, about everything. And yet, he continued renting out the cabin, as if it were just another ordinary property. I glanced at the list of rules on the table, now stained with the marks of my anxious hands. Each one had been more than just a warning. They were conditions for survival, and I had nearly failed. I thought about the figures, the distorted forest, the fall. I had survived, but I knew something within me had changed forever. The sun was still shining outside, but the sense of safety never returned. As I packed my things to leave, one lingering question burned in my mind. Would you dare to spend a night in a place like this? Or follow rules without knowing why? Sometimes strange rules have a purpose. Would you follow them or risk finding out what happens when you break them? If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing more stories like this. Activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos, and remember, sometimes the mystery is closer than we think. See you next time.